Dr. Harold Smith sat in his plush office, surrounded by framed diplomas and gleaming awards. The room exuded an air of success and respectability. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, his voice authoritative. Jamal entered, his nervousness evident in his fidgeting hands and darting eyes. The young man's dark skin contrasted sharply with the pale walls of the office. Harold's lips tightened almost imperceptibly as he observed his new patient. "Dr. Smith, thank you for seeing me," Jamal began, his voice slightly trembling. "I've been having issues with my vocal cords, and as a music student, it's really affecting my performance." Harold's eyes narrowed as he listened, his mind already forming judgments based on Jamal's appearance rather than his words. "I see," he said curtly, cutting off Jamal's explanation. "I'm afraid I won't be able to take you on as a patient. There are compatibility issues." Jamal's face fell, a mix of confusion and disappointment clouding his features. "But sir, I don't understand. My condition?" "I've made my decision," Harold interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There are other doctors in the area who might be better suited to your needs." Dejected, Jamal left the office, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he walked down the street, a group of his friends spotted him. "Hey, Jamal, how'd it go?" one called out. Jamal shook his head, recounting the brief, disheartening encounter. His friends rallied around him, offering words of encouragement and support. "Don't let this stop you, man," one friend said firmly. "Your voice is too good to give up on." Nodding slowly, Jamal squared his shoulders. "You're right," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I won't let this setback define me. I'll find another way." Yet as he walked on, the weight of Dr. Smith's rejection hung heavy on his mind, a stark reminder of the obstacles he faced in pursuing his dreams. Sarah Smith sat in a crowded university lecture hall, her pen moving rapidly across her notebook. The discussion group, focused on racial inequality in medicine, had become heated. "It's not just about access," a fellow student argued. "It's about inherent biases in treatment." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. As the daughter of a prominent doctor, she felt a responsibility to bring these discussions home. That evening, as the Smith family gathered for dinner, Sarah saw her opportunity. "Dad," she began, passing the salt to Harold, "we had an interesting discussion today about racial disparities in healthcare. Did you know that studies show pain is often undertreated in Black patients?" Harold's fork paused midway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, his expression guarded. "Sarah, those studies are often flawed. They don't account for all variables." "But Dad, the evidence is overwhelming," Sarah pressed. "It's not just about pain management. It's about diagnosis rates, treatment options, even bedside manner." Harold's jaw tightened. "I treat all my patients equally," he said firmly. "These so-called disparities are often exaggerated for political reasons." Sarah felt frustration rising in her chest. How could her father, a man she respected, be so dismissive? "It's not about individual doctors, Dad. It's about systemic issues that affect entire communities." The conversation devolved into tense silence. Sarah pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone. She realized that changing minds, even those closest to her, would be harder than she thought. Later that night, Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her father's dismissive attitude gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to do more than just talk. But what? As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah resolved to find a way to make a tangible difference in her community, unaware that her path would soon intersect with a young man fighting for his voice and his dreams. The next day, chaos erupted on a busy street near the hospital. Jamal, walking with a group of friends, suddenly clutched his throat and collapsed. His friends shouted for help as passers-by gathered around. Within minutes, sirens wailed and an ambulance screeched to a halt. Paramedics rushed to Jamal's side, quickly assessing his condition. Male, early 20s, severe respiratory distress. One called out as they loaded him into the ambulance. At the hospital, the emergency room burst into action as Jamal was wheeled in. Nurses and doctors swarmed around him, calling out vitals and orders. "We need an ENT specialist stat," a nurse shouted. Dr. Harold Smith, on his rounds, heard the commotion. He hurried to the emergency room, stopped short when he saw Jamal on the stretcher. Recognition and shock flashed across his face, quickly replaced by professional determination. "What's his condition?" Harold demanded, stepping forward. As the team briefed him, Harold's mind raced. This was the young man he'd turned away, now fighting for his life. Harold worked methodically, pushing aside his personal feelings. As he examined Jamal's throat, he noticed a distinctive birthmark on the young man's neck. A memory stirred. He'd seen that mark before, years ago. Suddenly, Harold froze. He remembered a friend from medical school, a brilliant black student named Marcus who'd faced constant discrimination. Marcus had a son, with the same birthmark. The realization hit Harold like a physical blow. This wasn't just any patient. This was Marcus's son. Marcus, who'd been denied opportunities due to his race. Marcus, who died tragically young, leaving behind a family. As Harold continued treatment, his hands steady but his mind in turmoil, he grappled with the weight of his actions. He'd turned away not just a patient, but the son of a man he'd once called friend. The son of a man who'd faced the very prejudices Harold had perpetuated. With renewed determination, Harold focused on saving Jamal's life, knowing that this moment would change everything. As Jamal slowly regained consciousness in the hospital room, his eyes focused on a young woman arranging flowers by his bedside. It was Sarah, Dr. Smith's daughter, volunteering at the hospital as part of her research project. "You're awake," Sarah said, noticing Jamal's movement. "How are you feeling?" Jamal tried to speak, but winced in pain. Sarah quickly handed him a notepad and pen. He scribbled, "Better, but throat hurts." "You are?" "I'm Sarah," she replied. "I volunteer here." "You gave everyone quite a scare." Over the next few days, Sarah visited Jamal regularly. They communicated through notes and gestures, forming an unexpected connection. Sarah learned about Jamal's passion for music and his struggles as a young black artist in their community. One day, Sarah arrived with a determined look. "I've been thinking," she said. "I'm studying speech therapy as part of my research. Maybe I could help with your vocal rehabilitation?" Jamal's eyes lit up. He nodded enthusiastically, writing, "That would be amazing. Thank you." Their sessions began, mixing professional guidance with friendly conversation. Sarah's expertise and Jamal's dedication proved a powerful combination. Slowly but surely, Jamal's voice began to recover its strength and range. Meanwhile, Dr. Harold Smith observed this budding friendship from afar. He watched as his daughter passionately helped the young man he had once turned away. The sight stirred a complex mix of emotions in Harold: pride in Sarah's compassion, shame at his own past actions, and a growing sense of unease about his long-held beliefs. One evening, as Sarah excitedly recounted Jamal's progress over dinner, Harold found himself struggling to reconcile his previous prejudices with the reality before him. The young man he had dismissed was now a central part of his daughter's life, challenging everything Harold thought he knew. As the weeks passed, Harold grappled with his internal conflict, watching as Sarah and Jamal's friendship deepened, forcing him to confront the consequences of his biases in a way he never expected. Inspired by their sessions and conversations, Jamal and Sarah conceived an idea to organize a cultural event at the hospital. Their vision was to celebrate Black culture and highlight the experiences of patients from minority backgrounds. "We could have music, art, and personal stories," Sarah suggested enthusiastically. "It could raise awareness and bring the community together." Jamal nodded, his voice stronger now. "And it could show patients like me that they're seen and valued here." They began reaching out to local artists, musicians, and community leaders. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many eager to participate. The hospital administration, however, was hesitant. When Sarah approached her father about the event, Harold's initial reaction was reluctance. "I'm not sure the hospital is the right place for this kind of celebration," he said cautiously. But as he saw the determination in Sarah's eyes and heard about Jamal's passionate involvement, Harold's resistance began to waver. He realized this could be a chance to make amends, to support not just his daughter but also the community he had long kept at arm's length. "All right," he finally agreed. "I'll speak to the board, but you two will be responsible for organizing everything." With Harold's support, the event gained momentum. Local media picked up the story, framing it as a groundbreaking initiative to address racial disparities in healthcare. As the day approached, the hospital buzzed with activity. Volunteers hung artwork depicting Black history and culture. Musicians set up in the main lobby. Patients and staff alike expressed excitement about the upcoming celebration. The event itself exceeded all expectations. The hospital halls filled with music, laughter, and conversation. Patients shared their stories, some heartbreaking, others inspiring. Healthcare professionals engaged in frank discussions about improving care for minority communities. As Harold watched the diverse crowd mingling and sharing experiences, he felt a shift in his perspective. This wasn't just a cultural celebration. It was a vital step towards building a more equitable and compassionate healthcare system. For the first time, he truly began to understand the importance of acknowledging and addressing racial disparities in medicine. As the event's success reverberated through the hospital and community, Dr. Harold Smith found himself in unfamiliar territory. His long-held beliefs were being challenged not just by external forces, but by his own changing perceptions. In the staff lounge, Harold overheard colleagues discussing the event. "It was impressive," one doctor admitted. "But do you think Smith's gone soft? This isn't like him at all." Harold paused, unsure how to respond. He realized that his support for the event had marked a significant departure from his previous stance. It wasn't just his colleagues who had noticed. He was questioning his own past actions and attitudes. The day of Jamal's performance arrived, and the hospital auditorium was packed. Harold sat in the back, watching as Sarah introduced her friend to the audience. When Jamal took the stage, his presence was magnetic. Jamal's voice, now fully recovered, filled the room with a soulful melody. He sang about struggle, resilience, and hope. As he shared his story of rejection and recovery, Harold felt a lump form in his throat. He saw not just a talented young man, but a reflection of all the potential he had dismissed over the years. The audience was visibly moved. Many were in tears by the end of Jamal's performance. Sarah beamed with pride as she joined him on stage, the two of them embodying the spirit of change that was sweeping through the hospital. After the performance, Harold found himself approached by younger staff members, praising his support for the initiative. "Dr. Smith, we never expected you to back something like this. It's really opened our eyes to what's possible here." Their words stirred a mix of pride and shame in Harold. He was proud of the positive impact, yet ashamed of how surprised everyone was by his support. It forced him to confront the reputation he had built over years of maintaining the status quo. That night, Harold sat alone in his study, reflecting on the day's events. He realized that his narrow viewpoint hadn't just hurt others. It had limited his own growth and understanding. The emotion of Jamal's performance, the joy on Sarah's face, and the palpable sense of community in the hospital had shown him a different way forward. With a deep breath, Harold made a decision. It was time to actively work towards change, not just in the hospital, but in himself. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond his medical practice. It was time to heal more than just physical ailments. In the days following the event, Dr. Harold Smith found himself at the center of a growing controversy within the hospital. A group of senior doctors, led by Dr. Richard Hawthorne, a longtime colleague and friend, confronted Harold in his office. "Harold, what's gotten into you?" Dr. Hawthorne demanded. "This event, your sudden interest in diversity, it's causing unrest among the staff." Harold straightened in his chair, feeling the weight of years of conformity pressing against his newfound convictions. "Richard, times are changing. We need to address the inequalities in our healthcare system. We've always provided excellent care to all patients," another doctor interjected. "Why rock the boat now?" Harold took a deep breath. Because excellent care isn't just about medical procedures. It's about understanding and addressing the unique challenges faced by different communities. The tension in the room was palpable. Harold could see the disapproval in his colleagues' eyes, the same disapproval he might have shared just weeks ago. "You're jeopardizing the reputation we've built," Dr. Hawthorne warned. "Patients come here for our expertise, not social experiments." Harold stood, his resolve strengthening. Our reputation should be built on providing the best care possible to all patients. That includes acknowledging and addressing systemic biases. As the argument intensified, Sarah, who had been passing by, overheard the heated exchange. She lingered outside, her heart swelling with pride at her father's words. After his colleagues left, Harold sat back down, exhaling heavily. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But as he reflected on Jamal's story, on Sarah's passion, and on the positive impact of the recent event, he felt more certain than ever that it was the right path. Meanwhile, Sarah, inspired by her father's stance, felt a renewed determination. She realized that the event was just a starting point. There was so much more work to be done to address the deep-rooted issues in the healthcare system. That evening, as Sarah shared her plans to expand her advocacy work, Harold listened with a mixture of pride and concern. He knew the road ahead would be challenging for both of them, but he was ready to face it. For the first time in years, he felt aligned with a purpose greater than his individual practice, a chance to make a real difference in the lives of all patients, regardless of their background. Sarah's involvement in civil rights advocacy intensified in the weeks following the hospital event. She joined a local group dedicated to addressing racial disparities in healthcare, attending meetings, and helping to organize protests. One evening, Sarah came home energized from a planning session. "Dad, we're organizing a demonstration next month. We're calling for mandatory bias training for all medical staff in the city." Harold listened, a mix of pride and apprehension on his face. "That's ambitious, Sarah. You know it won't be easy to implement." "I know," she replied, determination in her voice. "But it's necessary. We can't ignore these issues any longer." Meanwhile, Jamal had become a regular fixture at community events, using his voice to inspire others. At a local youth center, he shared his story with a group of aspiring musicians. "Don't let anyone tell you your dreams aren't worth pursuing," Jamal said, his voice strong and clear. "Your experiences, your struggles, they're what make your art powerful." As Jamal's influence grew, Harold found himself increasingly torn. He was impressed by the young man's resilience and talent, yet he couldn't shake the guilt over his initial treatment of him. At the hospital, Harold noticed subtle changes. Younger staff members were more vocal about addressing patient concerns, particularly those from minority communities. Some older colleagues, however, viewed these changes with skepticism. During a staff meeting, a heated debate erupted over new diversity initiatives. Harold, once silent on such matters, found himself speaking up. "We have a responsibility to address these issues," he said firmly. "It's not just about individual actions, but about creating a system that serves all patients equally." His words were met with mixed reactions. Nods of approval from some, frowns of disapproval from others. Harold realized that his journey towards change was far from over. Later that week, Harold attended one of Jamal's performances. As he watched the young man on stage, confident and passionate, he felt a profound sense of regret for his past actions, mixed with hope for the future. On his way out, Harold overheard two attendees discussing the performance. "Can you believe Dr. Smith is here? I thought he was against all this." Harold paused, realizing that his presence was noticed, his actions scrutinized. He understood that true change would require more than just attending events. It would demand active participation and advocacy. As he drove home, Harold grappled with the path ahead. He knew that fully embracing this new direction would mean challenging long-held beliefs and risking relationships with old colleagues. Yet, as he thought of Sarah's passion and Jamal's resilience, he felt a growing conviction that it was the right thing to do. One quiet afternoon, Harold found himself alone with Jamal in a hospital corridor. The young man was there for a follow-up appointment, his recovery progressing well. Harold felt a sudden urge to address the elephant in the room. "Jamal," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I owe you an apology. My initial refusal to treat you, it was wrong. Inexcusable, really?" Jamal looked at him, surprise evident in his eyes. "Dr. Smith, Please, let me finish," Harold continued. "I've spent my career believing I treated everyone equally, but I didn't. My actions were rooted in prejudices I didn't even realize I had. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you." Jamal nodded slowly, processing the unexpected apology. "Thank you, Dr. Smith. I won't lie, your rejection hurt. It made me question my worth, my dreams. But I appreciate your honesty now." As they talked, Harold felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Yet he could see in Jamal's eyes that the scars of rejection ran deep. Trust, once broken, would take time to rebuild. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jamal's friendship continued to grow. They often met at a local cafe, discussing their shared passion for social justice. Sarah found herself drawn to Jamal's quiet strength and determination. "You know," Sarah said one day, stirring her coffee, "your story has really inspired a lot of people at the hospital. It's making a difference." Jamal smiled, a mix of pride and vulnerability in his expression. "I'm glad, but sometimes I wonder if it's enough. There's still so much work to do." At the hospital, Harold's newfound advocacy for equality was met with mixed reactions. Some colleagues, particularly younger staff, rallied behind him. Others, however, viewed his change of heart with suspicion. Dr. Hawthorne cornered Harold after a staff meeting. "You're playing a dangerous game, Harold. This crusade of yours, it's going to backfire." Harold stood his ground. "It's not a game, Richard. It's about doing what's right. We can't ignore these issues any longer." As he walked away from the confrontation, Harold felt a strange mix of uncertainty and resolve. He knew the path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right side of history. That evening, as Harold watched Sarah and Jamal chatting animatedly on the porch, he reflected on the changes in his life. He had a long way to go in undoing years of ingrained biases, but he was committed to the journey. The road to redemption and true equality would be long, but Harold was finally ready to walk it. As Harold delved deeper into addressing racial disparities at the hospital, he uncovered disturbing practices among some of his colleagues. Dr. Hawthorne and a small group of senior doctors were consistently prescribing less effective treatments to minority patients, citing cultural differences as their justification. Harold spent sleepless nights agonizing over his next move. Exposing his colleagues could jeopardize his career and friendships, but remaining silent would perpetuate harm to patients. Finally, he decided to act. "I have evidence of discriminatory practices," Harold announced during a board meeting, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We need to address this immediately." The room erupted into chaos. Some board members demanded immediate action, while others accused Harold of betrayal. Dr. Hawthorne, red-faced with anger, stormed out of the room. In the following days, the hospital became a hotbed of tension. Staff members took sides, and Harold found himself isolated from many of his longtime colleagues. Yet, he also gained unexpected allies among younger doctors and nurses who had long noticed these issues but felt powerless to speak up. The situation reached a boiling point when Dr. Hawthorne, in a desperate attempt to discredit Harold, leaked information about Harold's initial refusal to treat Jamal. The story spread quickly, threatening to undermine Harold's credibility. Sarah, hearing the news, rushed to her father's office. "Dad, are you okay? This is getting out of control." Harold sighed heavily. "It's the consequence of my past actions, Sarah, but I can't back down now. Too much is at stake." As the controversy grew, the hospital board launched a formal investigation. Harold provided all the evidence he had gathered, knowing it could end his career but potentially save countless lives. The investigation's findings were damning. Dr. Hawthorne and several others were found guilty of systemic discrimination. They were immediately suspended pending further action. In a surprising turn of events, Harold's honesty about his past mistake with Jamal and his subsequent efforts to change were viewed positively by the board. They saw it as a testament to personal growth and commitment to equality. In the aftermath, Harold was asked to lead a new diversity and inclusion initiative at the hospital. It was a bittersweet victory, as he saw former friends escorted from the building, while also witnessing the hope in the eyes of minority staff members. Jamal, having followed the events closely, reached out to Harold. "Dr. Smith, I heard what happened. I want you to know, I forgive you. What you've done, it's making a real difference." Those words meant more to Harold than any professional accolade. He realized that true redemption came not from erasing past mistakes, but from actively working to create a better future. As the dust settled, Harold, Sarah, and Jamal found themselves at the forefront of a movement for change in their community. The hospital became a model for addressing racial disparities in healthcare, and Jamal's music career blossomed as he used his platform to advocate for equality. The journey was far from over, but as Harold looked at the diverse faces of new medical students touring the hospital, he felt a profound sense of hope. Change was possible, one conversation, one action, one life at a time.